This is the Six Figure Home Studio Podcast, episode 13.
You're listening to the Six Figure Home Studio Podcast, the number one resource for running a profitable home recording studio. Now your hosts, Brian Hood and Chris Graham.
Welcome back to another episode of the Six Figure Home Studio Podcast. Today's episode is a treat. In my opinion, it's a treat because we got country music mixing engineer Billy Decker, who is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, country music mixing engineer in Nashville. He has mixed records for people like Billy Ray Cyrus, Kenny Chesney, Darius Rucker, Jason Aldean, Sam Hunt, Dustin Lynch, Chris Young. He's Cassidy Pope. Tons and tons and tons and tons of people. That's all you need to know. I think to his name at this point, over 25 million records sold with his mixing credit on it. And I was just looking around at some of the music videos he has on his site, and just looking at 7 or 8 music videos, they have a total view count of over 250, 260 million people have watched the music videos just from 7 or 8 videos. This guy has made it. If you could ever say that anyone has made it in country music, this guy has made it in the mixing world for country music. This is an extraordinarily competitive market. The country music world has so much competition, and Billy Decker has somehow found a way to not only break into this industry, but to absolutely dominate it. And it's not going to take you very long once you start listening to this interview to understand why he has had such a long and successful career. And just a quick disclaimer, there are some audio issues in this episode that you will have to deal with because it is what it is. It was our first guest on here, and we're still figuring out our systems on how to get the best audio from all of our guests with the least amount of feedback and weird little glitches. And unfortunately, it's not perfect audio, so you'll just have to look past that fact. You are about to get a behind-the-scenes listen to how this man has entrenched himself in one of the most difficult genres to break into and sustain a very long and very lucrative career in this world. So without further delay, here is our interview with Billy Decker. So Billy Decker, we are so stoked to have you here. Welcome to the Six Figure Home Studio Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Greetings from Nashville, Tennessee.
Tell me about your first paid project. This is a huge moment in a lot of home studio owners, or even commercial studio owners in your case. This is a huge deal in a lot of our lives, and I'd love to kind of hear back the story around your first paid project. My
first paid project here in Nashville probably would have been my first paid job. I moved from via Nebraska to Virginia Beach as a staff engineer out in Virginia Beach doing R&B and hip hop all the way down to Nashville in probably 94, and nobody would hire me. So I've got a criminal justice degree from the University of Nebraska. Then I went to Full Sail and came to Nashville, and I found myself washing dishes at Longhorn Steakhouse because nobody would hire me. And then I moved over to Applebee's, gave myself a raise, and started waiting tables at Applebee's instead of washing dishes. And in the meantime, I snuck into Belmont University, believe it or not. Here I am like a 26-year-old, 27-year-old, and I snuck in late at night and took all their internships off their internship board and started cold calling people all over Nashville the next day. And I had a music publisher actually call me back and say, yeah, I could use some help. It's unpaid. And what you'll be is a song plugger. So that was back when we had cassettes. And so my job was to make the cassettes and then to deliver them to the music publishers, the artists, the record companies, whoever he had meetings lined up with to pitch these writers' songs. So I was a song plugger, was the title. Well, after a while, I was like, why in the world am I pitching their songs? I used to be a artist, every failed engineer or every good engineer is a failed musician. So I'm like, I can write songs. I'm going to do this. So I went out and wrote like 12 songs, mixed them myself, engineered them, recorded them, paid for everything. And when I was out supposed to be having meetings and pitching other people's songs, I would slip some of mine in as well. Well, this gal over at Curb Records was like, hey, these are pretty good. Who is this? And I'm like, well, it's me. And fast forward 2 months later, I ended up getting a staff writing deal at Curb Records. And I was
Wow.
actually there for 5 years. Now, the good part of the story is right when I got that, a friend of mine called me and said there's a gentleman by the name of Pat Finch who was running Famous Music Publishing, and he was building a studio, and he just got the gig to run the music publishing company, and he was putting together a studio and was looking for an engineer. So I grabbed a resume real quick, and ran down there to Famous Music Publishing and gave him my resume, and I walked in to see Pat in the studio in the basement of Famous Music, and Guitar Center had just dropped off all the gear. This was on like a Friday, and he was sitting in a pile of boxes and wires. Studio was totally just built out, but it had no gear set up, and he had just taken over. So I said, "Hey, Pat, I'm Billy Decker. Heard you're looking for an engineer." He's like, yeah, whatever. It's Friday. It's like 3:00. He's like, "I've got a session. I've got to figure out how to put all this stuff together. I have no idea what I'm doing. I'm a music publisher, not an engineer." He's like, "Leave your resume with me and just basically get out." He's like, "I'm on a time schedule. You're killing me, dude." So I was like, oh, bummed out. So I started driving home, and I was like, you know what? No pain, no gain, no chance, whatever. I turned the car around, took an exit on the interstate, drove back to him. I said, and I walked in. He's like, "What are you doing here?" He's like, "Basically, I told you to get the hell out, I'm like, "Pat, I'll make you a deal." I said, "You give me the gig, I will stay this weekend. I'll wire your entire studio. You won't have to do a thing, and I will run your sessions. We will not miss our deadline Monday morning. I promise you." He's like, "You're hired." He threw me the pack of cables and walked out of the room. I ended up being there for about 6 years as a staff engineer. So that was my first paid gig, and it all happened within like 2 weeks of getting a writing deal as well. So I went from waiting tables, washing dishes, sneaking in, stealing internships, did an internship for about 3 to 6 months. Then it turned into a paid gig, songwriter, and then turned into an engineering gig.
Walk us through that moment when you're thinking about turning around. Tell me a little bit more about that. When you're driving on the highway.
You know what? I've always been the kind of person where I've only been self-employed. So all I know is myself. So if I screw up, it's my fault. If I do good, it's my fault. In high school, I played tennis, which is like a individual sport. You know what I mean? And I also was a gymnast for like a day, a week, one day. But everything I've always done has always been kind of like individual sports. So I am of the mindset that you make or break your own situation. You know what? And if you want to make your future, you've got to go out and do it. Nobody's going to hand it to you. Nobody's going to give it to you. I actually, after I got going a few years down the road, I was working on a record for Asylum Records, and I was listening to that Bryan Adams, "Everything I Do for You," produced by Mutt Lange, mixed by Bob Clearmountain. And I'm like, oh, that is the greatest drum sound in the world. So I got the album credits out, found out, I think I dug around in a mix magazine and found out where his studio was. And I cold called him. There was a number below his studio. So I cold called Bob Clearmountain, hoping to ask him for a snare sample. And literally, he picked up the phone and he's like, "Hello?"
Wow.
I'm like, "Bob, you don't know me from Adam, but this is Billy Decker. I'm working on a record on an Asylum artist, and I'm a big fan of that drum sound." He's like, "Well, a lot of those were Mutt Lange samples, but we mixed a bunch of mine in." He's like, "Do you have my Bob Clearmountain sample pack?" I'm like, "No." And he's like, "Give me your address. I'm going to send it to you." So we literally talked for about 45 minutes, and that moment kind of defined me. I'm like, if Bob Clearmountain can talk to a nobody, then for the rest of my life, if I ever rise in the ranks, I'm going to do my best to return every single phone call and give everybody the time of day. So I will always return an email. I'll always return a phone call. Big or small, it don't matter. You know what I mean? He took a chance on me, so I figured the least I can do is take a chance on somebody else and pay it forward.
That's awesome.
So how you were working with someone as a staff engineer for a while. When did you finally break out to be on your own, to be the Billy Decker name? That is the person that you rely on, you yourself, and no one else.
Probably 2001. 2001 is when I went really hardcore away from the staff engineer, totally independent. So I was like 1099. even though I say I was a staff engineer, Brian, but I was still 1099 across the board. I was like the guy on staff, but I wasn't getting a check and benefits and all that.
So for anyone that doesn't know what that means, 1099 just means he was self-employed. They would send him what's called a 1099 in America. And that just says, hey, he's a freelancer. We're paying him this amount of money and he doesn't actually work for us. So we don't have to give him benefits or overtime, which is just a sleazy way of getting away from paying that kind of stuff.
And you have to pay taxes. They do not take out taxes.
That's right.
So you're responsible for your own taxes. And that's another piece of advice we'll probably get to later on, but always pay your taxes and stay ahead of them. Stay ahead of them being self-employed. That's very important.
So when you finally broke out on your own, was it due to you getting side projects, outside of the studio that were under your own name, or was it because you had built relationships as a staff engineer and that parlayed well into your own career as a mixing engineer?
Yes, everything in Nashville has always, for me, been word of mouth. Nobody uses business cards. I would engineer a demo session for a writer, and that writer would co-write with somebody else. So they would demo in batches of 5. So hypothetically, you had 5 brand new people you could meet because they wrote with 5 different people. And sometimes they would do a 3-way or even a 4-way co-write. So I'm meeting all these writers, and it just literally exponentially just kind of spider webs out. So you always had to be on your best behavior and treat every writer like gold, like they were the artists, and you always had to be really quick with the turnaround too, because these writers are trying to get their songs written and done in time and over to their publishing company so they could submit them to get on like Jason Aldean's record or Carrie Underwood or Kenny Chesney. So you had to be really quick mixing, get them done fast, and you had to be nice to everybody so that you kept working, So that just kind of spiraled, spiderwebbed, and before long, I just had a rock solid base of clientele that to this day I still have. And literally, I could not mix a single album for the rest of my life and still make a great living off just doing demos. Now, ever since the advent of Spotify, that's kind of diminished a bit because there's been a lot of in-the-box programming and everybody's cut back on their demo budgets. But I still get a lot of independent projects, and a lot of people say, somebody in Seattle call me up saying, hey, I've got a new single we're releasing, we're doing SoundCloud, Spotify, all that stuff. And so between that and just my reputation for being fast and getting it done and calling people back, that's kept me employed.
So going back to the spiderweb thing you were mentioning when you would talk about working with songwriters and there would be 5 of them there, and then, that would be 5 new people you meet, and that was just a spiderwebbing, natural networking type of thing. Was that an intentional thing that you were doing in order to meet more people and find more people to work with? Or is that just something that happened to be the case?
Totally organic. Totally happened just on its own. Nashville is it's become a big town, but yet it's still a small town. And even more so back in the day, people used to walk up and down the 3-block music row, 16th, 17th, 18th, and then sometimes 19th. But people would just be walking up and down, pitching songs, walking to studios to co-write at publishing companies. So yeah, it just literally, it's a town unlike any other. And it's gotten away from that. I will be honest. I'm over in Berry Hill now. So a lot of people are over in Berry Hill. There's still people on Music Row, but that's diminished. They're putting up condos and stuff. So, but yeah, it totally happened organically.
So I'm wondering about, this experience of being, sort of the staff engineer and kind of how that compared to Full Sail, to an audio education. Would you kind of compare and contrast what you learned as a student versus what it was like in the real world?
No, I'll be honest with you. If knowing what I know now, I will give the audio school credit because they helped me get internships. And back in the day, you needed to know signal flow on those large format consoles. But I was one of the first guys here in Nashville to jump on Pro Tools. So I didn't use my large format console knowledge very much. On my internships I did where I was aligning tape machines and whatnot. But in hindsight, I learned the majority out in the real world, just doing it every day. One thing they don't teach you at any of these recording schools is people skills, which I think is 90 8% of it, you know? We can all learn to engineer. Now, granted, some of us, or I'd like to say some of us just have a natural talent for being able to get stuff quick and recognize frequencies. And I think some people are almost just born with it, you know, with just a musical ability, which really helps in this field. But 98% of my return business is all people skills. I've actually had people come in and say, Decker, you're definitely not the best engineer, but you're probably one of the coolest dudes to hang out with, so we're going to keep coming back. And your studio smells good. You burn incense and you got good snacks. So we're coming back.
What do you think attributes to your amazing people skills? Because I know you, a lot of people like talk about how nice you are. Was that something you had to learn over time? Was this something you read in a book? Was this something that you just inherited from your family? How did this come about?
Well, if you ask my wife, it's all a bunch of shit. She's like, you're nice to everybody at work, and then you come home and you're not nice. And I'm like, well, that's because I've been nice to everybody at work. No, I'm teasing. You know what? I really give it to my parents. My dad was kind of like my hero growing up. He was a small town pharmacist, and he was the kind of that old school compoundist that would get called at like 2 or 3 in the morning when there was a sick baby and would get up, go out to the store, mix up the medicine, and then deliver it to the house, you know, for the sick baby. And I think I just got that from my dad. I really do. I don't know if you can be, well, obviously you can be taught that because my dad taught it to me, but, you know, I think I just attribute that to my upbringing. You know, I was small town Nebraska. Everybody knew everybody. Everybody was nice to everybody.
Good old boy.
Yeah, I really do think so. So, and you know what? At the end of the day, life's way too short to just be an asshole. You know what I mean? I don't get why some people are. I mean, it's so easy to be nice. Why wouldn't you be, you know? I remember the first couple sessions mixing for songwriters. Songwriters are pretty much like artists. You know what I mean? They're very type. Well, you can tell me you've done all those people analysis, Brian. What type am I talking? Is it like type A or where they're, I mean, songwriters like artists, they have that ego, and it's not a bad thing. That's what makes them an artist, but it needs to be constantly fed and affirmed. And I think everybody in the music business is. And I just learned real quick that if somebody brings me a new song and they're like, what do you think of it? And I'm like, it's okay. I'm like, that's like their baby to a songwriter. They just birthed a new baby. And if I just slapped their baby or called them ugly, they're never going to come back again, you know? I learned early on that the songs are more than just songs to them. It's actually a part of them. And without getting philosophical, it's almost like a part of their soul, you know, that they're bearing and stuff like that. So you've got to be real careful with how you treat their soul or their baby or whatever, you know?
That's super interesting. I would imagine that a lot of our listeners are probably thinking about that statement you made. 98% of it is people skills. And I totally agree. You know, for me personally with my mastering business, I used to produce and mix and all that stuff. And I figured I was decent at mastering, but that I was nice. And my experience with mastering engineers, I thought to myself, boy, if I can just be okay at mastering and nice, I'll kill it. I'll absolutely have a good business. And thank God that tended to be true.
Yeah.
But I think for a lot of our listeners, I'm sure that's a revelation to them that it's 98% people skills. I think it's super true. What would you say to these guys who maybe have good audio engineer skills, but it hasn't clicked to them yet that they're an ass? And that's one of the reasons that they're struggling in their business. How do you learn people skills like you have, Billy?
I would say you need to get out and be around other people. All of us are guilty. We get locked in the studio. And I mean, the stereotypical engineer, and you guys can back this up, is like a dude with super long hair, kind of wears the same t-shirt, you know, kind of doesn't shower, you know, needs deodorant, kind of just hunched over I mean, that's like through the years, that's been the stereotypical type of engineer. When you say audio engineer, everybody thinks, oh, kind of like dirtbag, just holed up in a studio, you know. And
we call those cave dwellers.
Yeah, exactly. and for better or worse, that's just the stereotype. So I would say the first thing you need to do if you want to break that stereotype is A, shower, B, wear deodorant, and C, just get out and network with people. There's always a bar or a club you can go to see new bands. Just show up and start shaking hands, introducing yourself, buy people some drinks, go up and talk to people. I've always been just real outgoing, and I mean, obviously if I'll cold call Bob Clearmountain, I'll pretty much talk to anybody, anywhere, I did the same with Mike Shipley before he passed away. I cold called Kevin Churko, and that's how I got to know him. So pretty much you have to force yourself to be around other people, and then all of a sudden it'll come naturally. And if you're an introvert and it's awkward, you need to put yourself in an uncomfortable situation enough times, and you'll overcome it. It's like public speaking. Everybody hates public speaking, but the people that have the gift, you can tell they're like super relaxed and stuff like that. But if you get them alone, everybody will admit they hate public speaking. Even the people that are good for it still get nervous. So I would say put yourself in uncomfortable situations and just make yourself be around people, and it'll just start coming to you.
I want to go back to what you were talking about when it came to going to shows, talking to people at events. I can tell you right now, there are a lot of people listening right now who cringe at the thought of that. They're so introverted. That's such a leap above what they could ever do in their minds to just go out and start talking to random people. But I know that you do that well, but B, you also are very active on social media or text messaging or online. What are some of the things you do to connect with people? Because the first time you ever talked to me, the first time I ever heard of you was actually a text message. You had texted me.
Yeah.
A cold text.
I remember that.
Do you do that a lot? Like, what do you do as far as online strategy or texting, or, how do you connect with people in a way that's not in person?
Facebook is probably the biggest thing that I do. I reach out to a lot of people just through Facebook, A lot of times I'll actually call some of my friends and say, hey, that's how I met you. I actually called another engineer, and he goes, oh yeah, that's Brian Hood. He's like, you need to check out this course, the From Shit to Gold. And so that's how we ended up, and then he showed it to me, and I researched it. I'm like, damn, that's like money. So that's how I ended up calling you, just cold called you. And then obviously we hit it off, because we're here talking today. And we've been to lunch and blah, blah, blah. But I would say social media. I'm not really good with Twitter or Instagram. I've got an Instagram, but I'm so behind the curve. I actually have my kids help me with it if I need to do something. But Facebook, I got down pretty good. So I'll actually instant message people, and then I just email a lot too. But I tell a lot of people that you can always email me if you've ever got a question. And 9 times out of 10, I'll get all these random emails, and then I'll end up meeting friends through that. Like, here's an example. I was listening to a hard rock, a metal band called Stitched Up Heart. And so I put on Facebook, I said, man, I'm listening to this. I love that snare sound. I need to bribe that producer with a cutting board. I'm all into woodwork, and I said, let me bribe him with a cutting board so I can get that snare sound. Does anybody know who it is? And I had all these people hit me back, and then one person actually gave me, I think it was his email or something. So I ended up emailing him and introduced myself that way. In the meantime, the guitar player from the band, Stitched Up Heart, somehow overheard that word of mouth, and he direct messaged me and said, hey, it's Mitchell Marlowe's the producer. He's like, I'm the guitar player. He's like, I think it was a sample, but I think he blended with a couple others. So he's like, this is how you get a hold of him. He's like, nice to meet you, dude. I saw your some podcast you did. So I'm like, it's a total small world. But seriously, you just got to put yourself out there and not be afraid to look like an idiot, And I'm totally of the mindset that you never stop learning. So I will ask anybody anytime. I am definitely not afraid to say, I have no idea how Brian Hood blends his drum sub and does his parallel compression. So I'll be the first to just cold call him and say, hey, how do you do this, Brian? That's great. And flattery will get you anywhere. If somebody calls me up and says, dude, I love what you do, right there, I make a note to email them right back. Somebody says they love what I do or they're a fan, obviously that's going to get a return phone call in a heartbeat. You know what I mean? So flattery will get you everywhere in my book.
So going back to the cutting board stuff you mentioned, this is one thing I had written down in my show notes to talk to you about. Your big secret is customer service, and you do that in a number of ways. But B, you also nurture those relationships through these cutting boards. I found this to be very interesting. You handcraft cutting boards as a side hobby, and you give them away. Can you tell us about that?
I do. A lot of times, like say for instance, I'll do an album. A lot of times I get paid, we shake hands, we're all friends, but you tend to drift apart from the A&R people, the record company, the managers, the producers. So I make these cutting boards, and I have a brand that actually stamps into the side of the cutting boards that says Decker Boards. And I have found on a number of occasions that if I gift them away to, my producer friends I've met along the way, or the artists or the A&R people, everybody cooks. Everybody eats every night. And when they're in their kitchen and they're chopping vegetables, and if they see Decker Boards, and it's like, oh, we got a new record. You know what? Damn, I about forgot about Billy Decker. But you know what? As I'm chopping this onion up, that reminds me, I need to call Decker.
That's awesome.
So, but you could do it in, you don't need to do cutting boards, but you can do it in other ways,
I think a cutting board is such a better way to leave something behind besides a terrible business card or some other small trinket like a pin.
Right. But I got into it just out of the necessity. My wife, actually, when we moved to a different house probably 6 years ago. And she's like, well, we finally have room for a big farm table. And she started looking at restoration hardware and stuff. And those damn things are like $6,000. And I'm like, you know what? I got some skills. I bet I could make a farm table. So I seriously got online, made our kitchen table, and that just spurned almost like a love and a passion for wood. It was like so cool to get out in the garage and get away from music, decompress, do something with your hands, and then, Sunday morning out there banging in the garage. The first thing Monday, you're like all rejuvenated for the studio again. You decompressed, you got away from music and took your mind off it. And now you're ready to hit the studio running 10 a.m. and you're like good to go. It's a good balance. I'm a big balance guy. So keep your home life in order, keep your mind in order, keep your body in order. Everybody gets sick. So if you're sick, heal your body up so you're not like screwing up your ears and your mixes and stuff. But ironically enough, I say that, but I actually chopped my finger off, my left index finger, out in the garage playing with wood. So fast forward, 2 days, I go in, they reattach my finger, put me in a splint. We were just leaving for vacation 2 days later. So the doctor loaded me up with hydrocodone. We get down to the beach. I take my laptop, which has my identical rig cloned in it, just in case I did get a call, because we were going on a week-long vacation at the beach. Second day down there, my hand was throbbing, and I was the guy in the water with the bandage on and the plastic baggie, just floating out there. I couldn't do anything much, because I just had surgery and stuff. So my wife and kids, everybody went to the beach. I'm like, I'm good. I'm just going to stay here. Well, I popped a couple of those hydrocodones they gave me, went out on the patio, checked my email, and a couple songwriter friends of mine had sent me a couple songs to mix. Well, I'm like, oh, that's kind of cool. I brought my laptop. So I went in, couldn't find my headphones, so I went to the refrigerator, grabbed a Corona, which was my first mistake because I was taking hydrocodone. So unwittingly, I started mixing Coronas sitting on the balcony, started mixing some songs, but I couldn't find my earbuds, so I ended up stealing my daughter's Hello Kitty headphones. So 2 hours later, I kick out 2 demos. I've already downed like 4 Coronas, high, drunk on hydrocodone Coronas, mixing on Hello Kitty headphones on a laptop, sitting on a balcony overlooking the ocean. Emailed them right back to the songwriters within 15 seconds. My inbox dings. They're like, Decker, we don't know what in the hell is going on down there, but these could be some of the best mixes you have ever done for us. And I just said thank you and never told them the truth.
Please tell me there's somewhere where we can hear this mix online somewhere.
I'll go back through my archives. I'll drag it up, but I do not recommend that. So back to my earlier statement, heal your body up first before you decide to mix, because you probably won't be as lucky as I was.
That's hilarious. Maybe you should mix with Hello Kitty headphones more often. Maybe that was the secret. They're like the new NS10 monitors.
That's my thing. Hello Kitty.
So this brings up an interesting topic that is, you are 100% in the box, right?
Correct.
And I remember whenever we first met, when I first came over to your studio just to chat about things, one of the notes I wrote down after that conversation was, that's one of your big things in Nashville, is you are one of the first guys to guarantee your work. You have an unlimited revision policy, and you're only able to do that because you're in the box. Is that right?
Correct. I still do that today. So I charge one price. Clients can call me 2 weeks from now and say, hey, give me a little vocal up or move that guitar around. 90% of my mornings are recalling and tweaking from past mixes. And then I usually start mixing in the afternoon, to be honest with you, because of that policy, you know?
So can you tell us, what does your day look like from morning to evening, or beginning of work to end of work? How do you structure your day typically?
I get a piece of paper and a Sharpie, and I write down everything I do, and then when I'm done, I cross it off. But I will check my email when I get up. 9 times out of 10, there's something from the day before or 2 days before, even a week before, that needs fixed or changed or versions done. I'll come in. First thing I'll do is do that. Second thing I'll do, in the meantime, I'll be downloading today's work, whatever it is. I would say, boy, about 75% of my stuff still comes Dropbox these days. People still want to stop over to the studio and just hand me a hard drive, shake my hand, say hello and stuff like that. But more and more, it's all internet. Everything is internet. So I'll do the recalls. I'll fire those out back to the client, and then I'll just start mixing today's work. And then as soon as I'm done, I always fire mixes out right after I'm done. So say I've got 4 things to mix today, I'll probably hear back on the first or second thing as I'm working on the third or fourth. So a lot of times I'll just save, stop, snap up the old mix, make the change, fire them out, and then jump back on it. I bounce to disk, so I don't use any external processing whatsoever. So it truly is 100% in the box. And back in the day, I used to catch some flack, even before there was like Pro Tools 5, before delay compensation and stuff like that. I used to catch flack, and I'm like, I just didn't care, because it was working. And I mean, I used to get on some of those forums like Gear Sluts and stuff and just get hammered. People are like, you can't mix in the box. What do you do? I'm like, well, I just did. It just went to number 1. I just made, X amount of money. I'm in this magazine. Somebody did it, and it was me. So, and now it's funny because I've gotten a jump on 90% of a lot of those guys that were telling me I couldn't do it now, and they're in the box now, and I still will get calls from a lot of those guys that used to hate on it. They're like, hey, Decker, how do you do this? I'm like, well, let me tell you.
I've seen the trend happening.
I hold no grudges. No grudges.
That's awesome.
It was just a fast way to work for me. It got me home quicker. I was able to eat dinner with my wife, have a home life. My kids were young, so I could, hell, I was getting up, driving them to school, dropping them off at 7:30, 8 o'clock. I'd get down to Music Row and have 2 songs mixed before 10 o'clock because the phone wasn't ringing. Music Row didn't open up till 10. I'd be done and home at 5 o'clock, and in the summertime, it stays light till 8, 8:30, so I could be out playing with my kids, mow the grass, all that stuff. Be a normal human being,
That's awesome. There was a friend of mine that told me one time, we were talking about, what it means to market yourself, to get customers to come back to you and to get customers to hire you. And he told me that he had heard some guy named Billy Decker say that people hire someone for 2 reasons. They like them, and they're the last person they thought of. And that just really blew my mind. Like, that really kind of jumped out and grabbed me. Does that ring a bell? Did he make that up? Is that a...
No, that probably sounds like some idiot words of wisdom I spit off a couple years ago.
That's amazing. We'll talk about that idea of people will hire the last person they thought of.
That's kind of the whole theory of insight in mind, and that's why I try to make social media my form of advertising. So I want to say, my wife says I post too much, but what I do try to post is I tell everybody Facebook's good for two things: bragging on yourself or bragging on your kids. Other than that, it's a waste of time, Forget all the political arguments, all the blah, 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 blah. So I basically post whenever I've got a new client or I'm doing something that I want other people to know about. Like Rodney Atkins and I were in the studio this last week, and he's coming back tomorrow, and we're going to finish up his new single. So I'm going to take a couple selfies with him and the producer. I'm going to post them, you know what I mean? And just maybe put a little snippet of what we were working on with my cell phone and put it out on Facebook, So I am a big believer that the more people see you working and know you're busy, you're going to be in the forefront of their mind. You know what I mean? So it's like they're doing something. It's like, oh, I'm cutting. I'm using a Decker board. I just saw Decker on Facebook. He's mixing Rodney. I just finished up Starset's new EP. That was a step outside of the country genre for me. And I'm just about ready to do a post about that, and basically just brag on that. I'm always of the mindset that you've got to be, in mind, insight. People have to be aware of you. Otherwise, they're going to forget about you, because let's be honest, there's gazillion engineers out there that are probably just as good that can do the job. But if I'm the one they thought of last, obviously I'm going to get the gig, So if I'm out at a showcase that I don't want to be at, but I know there's going to be industry people there, I'll go shake some hands. You know what I mean? Buy a couple drinks, and it's like, hey, we saw Decker the other night. Let's use Decker. So it gets tiring, and a lot of times you don't want to do it, and I don't do it as much as I used to. But boy, starting out, I sure did. I got out, and I made sure everybody knew where I was, what I was doing, and just tried to stay in the forefront of their mind.
I always tell people, if you don't come to mind when someone is ready to book a project, you will never, ever, ever, ever get the project. So exactly what you said there, doing things to brag about yourself online, which Billy says bragging, but really it's not. It's all he's doing is staying top of mind in a very strategic way. You could call it bragging, but it's really not, because his intention is to stay top of mind so he keeps getting work in his business. So if you fail to do that, if you fail to be in their mind on multiple touch points, so all these Facebook posts, if you aren't seen, if you aren't heard, you will not get hired.
Wise words.
Yeah, I really do think I just like to talk. I like hanging out with people. I like talking. So a lot of studios, they'll just mix and send the versions out, but I always invite my clients to come over and hang and tweak it out with me in person and make the final tweaks, And a lot of times they'll bring a friend or their co-writer, and that's just another way to just stay in the public eye, It does get harder, though, just because, everything's gotten more individualized, where we're on the internet or we get sent files and we really don't even need to interact with people. I mean, I remember growing up, we didn't have cell phones. You know what I mean? We had to talk to people. We had to go. I had a pager. We used to type letters, believe it or not. So maybe it's a generational thing. I don't know, but I just had to put myself in front of people and sell myself,
Well, I think for a lot of the people that listen to the podcast, I think that it's something I struggle with. Today, it happened to me, where I will get fixated on some kind of piece of equipment or some kind of upgrade that I need to make. Today, for me, it was like my hard drive structure. Should I upgrade the current hard drive I have and have 3 hard drives and move projects, all this stupid technical stuff. And I get going down these holes where I'll start thinking about some technical problem. And, we're all engineers. We like pushing buttons. We like plugging things in. We like moving the faders around. And, it's challenging for me to sometimes stop and say, what would probably be more effective at growing your business would be if you called these last 5 people that you finished a project for, or these last 5 people you haven't heard for, to be social and outgoing and have people skills and to be a friendly human. I think for a lot of audio engineers, because you hit the nail on the head, that the stereotype is not positive. about the social skills of audio engineers.
It's like the Dungeon and Dragons dudes, just holed up in their basement waiting to blow something up. Or
Full disclosure, I have played Dungeons and Dragons in my past, so I just want to get that out there.
I have not. I kind of want to.
Well, let's shift gears here a little bit. So your career, you had a pretty early start. You've obviously built relationships with a lot of people, and that has contributed to a massive amount of your success as one of the biggest country music mixers probably in the world. So talking about that transition from working out of someone else's studio, when did you get your first studio that you've worked out of on your own? When you got your own room?
When I moved over to Soundstage, probably in 2001, I had my own room over there, and we set up I was working in basically that little demo studio in the basement of Famous Music, and I had an opportunity. Their studio manager just cold called me and said, "Hey, we're looking for somebody who's a Pro Tool mixer to fill this room. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Well, sure." I went over there and looked, and it was like a 56 channel Pro Control back in the day, huge quested mains in the room. It was beautiful. I was over at Soundstage, one of the big three. So I said, sure, but there's no way I can afford this. And they're like, well, here, let's cut a deal. So basically, I split with them. Like, say, for instance, I mix a demo for $200. I would bill out $100 for my time back in the day, and I would bill out $100 for the studio. So I would fill out 2 invoices, and then the studio would give me a kickback. They gave me a percentage back as for incentive for bringing the business in. So I was like, well, that's fantastic. Well, it turns out that I had more business than I thought. So it ended up keeping me there until I left 3 years ago. So I was over there for 17 years, and it worked out great. Yeah, we had a great relationship. And then it swapped out owners, and some of the people in the accounting department decided they wanted to change the structure of our original deal. And I noticed my commission checks getting smaller and smaller, and it was because they weren't being, collected upon. And so I just made a couple calls and found a studio where I just actually lease. I just write them a check once a month, and then I keep everything. And at first I was nervous to do that, but I was just ready for a change. And that was the deal when I came over to this new place. And after being here for about 6 months, I realized I should have made this move about, 10 years ago.
So what years were you at Soundstage?
I was from Soundstage from 2001 to 2015.
Are you comfortable sharing kind of what it ended up costing you per month to stay at that place towards the end? I'm sure people are curious what a commercial space like that costs, because this is a 6-figure home studio podcast, so most people have home studios.
Well, here's the funny story. I actually went out and they said, go out and get us a number. We want you to just write us a check. We don't want to do the commission thing anymore. We're blah, blah. It's too hard to run these invoices down, whatever. So we want to change it up. So they're like, go check out rooms all over Nashville and come back to us with a number. So I did, and I found everything from like a closet from like $1,500 a month all the way up to a decked out place for $2,350. The place I'm at now is $2,000 a month, and it's fantastic. I've got a maid that comes in every Monday, bottled water provided. I've got a fridge, electricity. It's heaven. You know what I mean? I could stay here the rest of my life. So, but I went back to Soundstage and said $2,000, and they're like, "Are you insane?" And I said, "Why?" I said, they said, the worst you've ever done was like $6,000 in a month you made us. And the best was like 10 or 12. And so there's no way in hell we're going to give it to you for $2,000 a month. And I said, well, you understand that I would be a total idiot if I didn't leave. And they're like, no, we totally get that. I'm like, okay, well, I'm leaving.
So who has that room now? Is anyone even there?
I think they turned it into a production suite for one of their writers over there. They've got a full staff of writers. So I've only been back maybe 2 or 3 times in 15 years, so no hard feelings,
it's business. I get it.
Yeah. It was totally business, left on good terms. So no heartache at all, but it was just a business move, a smart one on my decision, and one I'm glad I made and wish I would have done it at least 5 years ago, maybe more. But it was scary, you know, going from a situation where you didn't have to kick out anything. And I probably had, boy, when I moved over here, I had to treat the room, buy some gear. So I probably was $5,000, you know, all in the move. And it was funny because that was when I told that story about cutting my finger off. That had just happened. So my wife actually, with a friend of mine, put together my Argosy desk. You know, you order from Argosy and it comes in pieces, almost like IKEA furniture. And so she actually offered to put that together because I couldn't use a screwdriver or wrench. I was a one-hand dude taped up. And funny story, for the last 2 years, when I would turn the volume and the subs would start resonating, I would hear this rattle in the console. And I'm like, son of a bitch, where is it? I chased down every loose knob on this Pro Control, my speakers, everything. And I've got a preamp over here on the right side, and I actually had an LED go out. So I pulled that out, lifted out this right side to send it off to get the LED fixed, and I found a little screw that my wife forgot to put in that was just sitting underneath on a piece of wood. And that's what's been rattling for the last 2 years. So I'm like, son of a... So I went home and I totally said, babe, anytime I tell that story, I am throwing you under the bus. I love you to death, but that screw caused me 2 years of resonance heartache in here.
As you've grown, you've matured, you've been in this a long time, mixing music and in the country music world specifically. What has become more important to you and what has become less important to you over the years?
You know what's become more important is keeping myself from getting bored and trying new things and trying to almost, these days, I almost feel like I'm 17 or 18 again and trying to learn as much as possible. Because you get to a point where you struggle your whole career when you're young to get to a certain point where you start getting work. Then you start getting work and it's almost like you go on autopilot for a bit. And then you get to a point where the work is coming in so much that all of a sudden you go, you know what? I need to reinvent myself to stay fresh and on top of it again. So that's what I find myself doing now on my days off when I do have one, is I literally feel like I'm 18 or 19 again and I'm going in trying new samples and trying to learn as much as possible. So you think you get to a point where you know it all, and I realize, boy, once you start thinking you know it all, you're done. So I'm like, I never stop learning, and people probably around the country will attest to it because I'm cold calling more and more people that I hear mixes on, and I'm just like, you know what? Now I've got a little bit of credibility so they won't think I'm like this crazy stalker. I can be like, hey, this is Billy Decker in Nashville, and they're like, oh, yeah, I think I've heard of you. I'm like, dude, I love what you did on so-and-so record. I'm like, you want to share samples? Do you want to, you know, be Facebook friends? How about I bribe you with a cutting board? Let me do something. Give me something, you know?
That's awesome.
So I think the main thing I've been doing lately is just having fun, you know? You get to a point where you just keep banging out so much stuff that it's like, I need to stay fresh, you know, for my own sanity's sake. So I'm having more fun than ever now, to be honest with you.
As we've been working on this podcast, you know, I think that there's this, you know, we try to figure out what's the goal here. What do we hope people get out of this? And obviously from the title of the podcast, Six Figure Home Studio, we're hoping what they get out of it is that their business runs better. But I think one of the things that's a little difficult to communicate is kind of right there with what you were saying, was the goal isn't maybe necessarily for people to have a bigger, better business. Well, that's got to be part of it, but to be a lifelong student, to be interested in constantly learning. And I think for a lot of people with, you know, having a business that runs well, they think, oh, you know, I'll learn some things and that'll be enough and then I'll be successful. I don't see that in any people that I know that run a successful business. Without a doubt, every single one of them is a lifelong learner and enjoys learning. That learning is a means to its own end. It's fun.
The reason I met Brian was because I kind of got bored just doing my own country thing. So I stepped into that metal genre, you know, the hard rock stuff he does so well. And I mean, I've always liked it, but I didn't learn to appreciate it until recently. And I learned to appreciate it from an engineering standpoint. And what was cool was I was hearing something that I couldn't do. So I'm like, I have to figure out how to do this, If I love hearing something that when I hear it, I go, holy smokes, how in the world did they do that? I've got some skills, but I mean, that's like some skills. So I love hearing something and then trying to figure out how to do it, or reaching out and then finding out it was like, oh yeah, I kind of knew how to do that all along. Maybe I just wasn't doing it enough or in the right way, or, that sound is something being compressed, 5 gazillion to 1 instead of 2 to 1. That was my problem, But what I do not like is hearing something and just going, God, done that, been there, been there, done that. I can do that with my eyes closed. That ain't fun, So I'm always trying to search outside the genre to find something new that almost like inspires me in an engineering way, and then bring it back to this format and try to morph it in with what I do. I think that's kind of fun, and that keeps me fresh, keeps me on top of the charts so I can hear what everybody else is doing and what's going on out there. And I've got enough work where it allows me to practice constantly. Every day I come into work, I consider it practice. I consider it practice for the next gig. So whether I'm working on a demo or a record, you're practice for me.
Have there been any other times in your career whenever you have done another reboot? Is this your first time doing a major reboot in your sound or what you're doing, or have you done this before?
No, I've done it before. I did it when Nickelback first came out. And then along the way, I've always been inspired by like Chris Lord-Alge and stuff like that. So anytime I used to hear him do something, I would try to reboot it, But I would say probably the biggest reboot I've done is since I've gotten involved with you and Universal Recording Machine, Nail the Mix guys. And that's probably the biggest reboot. I've just learned a lot about drums and sonics, that we weren't privy to in the country genre. So it's been a lot of fun trying to morph, a heavier sound with more aggressive tones into country.
That's really interesting. And I think, we talk a lot about people finding their niche. And I think that a lot of times a niche can be combining two things that haven't been combined before. And country and heavier music, there's certainly a crossover potential there because they're both sort of genres where size is the most impressive thing. If you have the biggest, most enormous, like sledgehammer of a mix, people go nuts for that. And not all music is like that.
No, I battle that a lot. And this last year, the majority of the comments or the tweaks have been, Decker, turn the damn snare down. And that's the fault of Brian Hood.
Guilty. I have a very loud snare in my mixes. That's one thing the heavy music genre, I think, gets better than any other genre is drums.
They do. They get the drums 100 times better than any other genre.
So for those of you guys listening that don't know, Brian has a class he came out with a while ago called From Shit to Gold. I got to just cuss on the mic. I don't get to do that very often. That was fun. But it's about, making... It's exactly what it sounds like, taking something that doesn't sound that great and making it sound enormous. So check that out, guys.
I actually just got on it the other day because I went back to revisit a mastering thing that Brian did regarding clipping in between two limiters. And I was like, man, I can't remember what he did. And I went back, watched it, applied it to this country mix, and woohoo, I was the loudest guy that day.
That's awesome.
That's so weird to hear this kind of stuff being brought over to the country mixing world.
Oh, it's great, yeah.
All right, another shift again real quick. I wanted to bring something up that we didn't get to talk about earlier, and that was as your career was ramping up, as you were getting bigger and better clients, as you were making more and more money year to year to year, did you hit any setbacks? Did you get any major growth pains along the way?
You know what? I didn't, but I will tell you this. Every year there is a lull in the music business. And it usually happens in January and February, just right after Christmas. And then a lot of times, summers can possibly be down, depending on if nobody's doing records, just because everybody goes on vacation, summer vacation. So every year I get to those points, and every year my business has pretty much stayed the same, if not grown. This last year was my biggest. The year before that was bigger than, or not as big, but second biggest. And then, it started ramping up back in 2000 or so. That's when it started, climbing. But every year, this same time of year, it never fails. The phone goes a week or 2 weeks and no emails come in, and the phone doesn't ring. And I walk downstairs in the morning, I get a cup of coffee, I see my wife, and I just look at her and say, babe, the dream is dead. It's over. Decker's done. I'm done. It's done. I'm going to move to Florida. I'm going to dig palm tree holes for a living. We are over. And sure enough, she's like, this happens every year for the last 22 years. Would you relax? And sure enough, when you go out in the garage, take your mind off it and start making some cutting boards or making a table or mowing the grass, all of a sudden you come back in and there's a message and the phone rings. But when you sit around waiting for it, it'll drive you crazy. And it happens to all my friends, the musicians, the engineers, everybody that's self-employed goes through that.
I tell people, if you're self-employed, you almost always feel like you're about 6 months away from the end of your career at any given time.
Yeah, and it never changes. I mean, here just like a week ago, I was telling my wife, I was like, it's kind of slim. Sure enough, I get 3 calls, one's a record, a bunch of independent stuff. My sheet's filled again. But it's just like it happens every year to everybody. I don't care who you are,
For me, if January slows down, the third week starts to pick up in January, February picks up a little bit more, and then March, April, May is bonkers every year. And I'll get frustrated sometimes when you kind of get that, lack of confidence, because you're forgetting that there are laws sometimes and lulls. And what would happen for me all the time is I'd say, all right, I'm going to get out of the studio. I'm going to go on a walk with my family. I'm going to do something with the kids. And then 3 people, would show up while I was gone. It's this like watch pot never boils thing. If you're sitting there waiting for it, it's like the universe is playing a joke on you, and it knows that you want to work, so it won't let you, but then you go and, do something family oriented or fun oriented, and boom, all the clients start showing up.
Yep. And what you do is the older you get, the smarter you get, and you start investing your money and managing it smarter when you get older, and you start thinking about those lull times, and you're like, you know what? Instead of buying that new car, I think I'm just going to hang on to this money because, it never fails. January's a little slim, and I bet if I had 20 grand sitting in my account, I would feel a whole lot more relaxed, rather than driving around in my new car. That ain't going to get me any gigs. So you just pick up a few little things and you start relaxing, and then you start going, you know what? I've been doing this for this long. It's not going to stop overnight. There's no way it's just going to it's not going to Bitcoin.
That's a new verb.
Yes.
When people are scared to quit their day jobs in order to pursue audio full time, I tell them this. I say, when you have a day job, you have one source of income. And if they decide to fire you or the business closes down, you lose that one source of income. But when you are a self-employed audio engineer, mixing engineer, whatever you want to call it, you have dozens or hundreds, or in some cases, thousands of clients, thousands of sources of income. You're not going to lose every single one of those overnight. Like Billy just said, it's going to be at worst a slow decline, in which case you can start reinventing yourself. You can start going out and building relationships. It's not as scary to be self-employed as, we said it, you feel like you're 6 months away from the end of your career, but that's mostly joking. Like we've all had long careers here. We've all had steady incomes for the most part, maybe some lulls here or there, but at no point do we just lose all income for the entire year. It just does not work like that when you have so many different individual sources of income.
Correct. Even guys that own businesses, they're self-employed. If you're not working for somebody and you're the boss, you're self-employed. Jeff Bezos, he's self-employed. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting conversation, especially what Brian brought up about how, if you're employed and you have a job, you have a single point of failure built into your life. You piss off the wrong guy or the wrong girl, you lose all your income the next day. So I think there's a component of that as a business owner and I'm curious to hear about for you. But for a lot of people, small business owners, especially when they're starting out, we'll see this thing where one of their clients will make up 50, 60% of their income. How would you classify your business and how that's worked? Is there your largest client provides, 20% in a given month or 10%, or what does that typically look like?
No, I was fortunate, and I've seen that happen where an engineer will gravitate towards one producer, and all of a sudden that producer goes out of vogue or out of fashion or just retires or whatnot. And that engineer is like, he's wrapped himself around that and bubbled himself. Nobody even knows he's available anymore because they thought, oh, that's so-and-so's engineer, So I've always been of the mindset that I want 5 of those guys, instead of just one big one. I'll take 5 medium-sized or maybe 5 guys that don't necessarily work as much, but will add up to that, and it's always still going. I mean, sure, you get some producers that you'll latch onto, but I've always made myself available. Even when I started doing records, I was advised by a big producer in town. They're like, dude, once you get up to a certain point, you need to quit doing demos. You need to stop that $100 here, $100 there thing. They're like, stop doing demos because you're going to be perceived as a demo guy. And I did not take their advice, and thank goodness I didn't, because when he told me that, I'm like, well, here, let me go think. These songwriters have kept me employed for the last 10 years. I can make a decent living if I never do a record just off songwriting demos, or I can take a chance and work for one producer, and then, you know what? If he doesn't get the gig, I don't get the gig. Once again, it's out of my hands. So I'm basically not self-employed anymore. I'm relying on that producer. So I'm like, you know what? I'm going to make myself available to anybody that's got audio. Have tracks, we'll mix. That's what I said. And sure enough, when one's down, another one's available. I made it a point to never turn down a gig, to never be too busy, and to tell everybody I'll always get it done. You won't miss your deadline, and I'll always work out a budget with you. And the reason I could do that is because I've figured out how to work so fast and efficiently. Maybe I don't have to charge $500 to mix this indie project. Maybe I'll mix it for $300. Maybe I'll do it for $400. Maybe I'll do your record for $1,500 instead of $2,500, Or maybe I will do it for $2,500. But I'm going to take everything, and at the end of the year, all those little things add up. And boy, I'm sure glad I didn't take that person's advice for that reason, and for the reason that now more than ever, a lot of those songwriters that I came up with are now producers, and they're the ones calling their buddies who used to mix all their own demos. Guess who that used to be? So it worked out threefold unintentionally, but it's like, no. I'm not going to pigeonhole myself or wrap myself around just one person. I'm going to work for everybody,
So what would you say your percentage of income from labels versus independent non-label projects is? Is it, I know in my own business, it's more like 90% comes from unsigned independent artists, and only about 10% is actually label work.
I would say label work is about 40%, maybe 50%. And the rest was publisher-wise, publishers here in town. And then the rest would be unsigned stuff, independent stuff. And then I do a bunch of Canadian stuff too. So I got plugged into the Canadian country music and have had some decent success up there. So I've got a handful of clients that are great up in Canada,
How did you get connected in Canada's country market when you're here in Nashville? How did that come about?
I actually mixed some demos for some Canadians that actually got upgraded into masters. And then when Canada's a lot smaller, obviously. I think we're 330 million in the United States, and Canada's like 30 million, So their country music community is even smaller than ours. And boy, word travels fast up there, I think I did something maybe a little bit quicker and cheaper than somebody else. And that ended up locking me into the system up there. And then I had success down here, and they're like, well, shoot, I kept my price the same. I've almost got like a Canadian price, And so I kept my price the same, and I'm having all this success mixing these hits down here. And I tell everybody, I don't care if I mix a demo or a master or an independent or what, I'm going to give you the same exact quality. The only difference is going to be what I'm getting paid. But you're not going to see anything different. The only person seeing anything different is me, and it'll be the money. And I got no problem doing that, and it's worked out great.
I've heard people have an issue with charging different rates for the same service to different clients. What is your opinion on that? Why do you think it's okay to do that sort of thing?
Because a lot of times I will ask the clients what they're comfortable with. And a lot of times they'll shoot out a price that's a lot higher than I would have even quoted. You know what I mean? So a lot of times I'll let them dictate the price. And just because I can do more volume than a lot of people, it doesn't bother me. As far as having multiple price points, there's record labels here in town that I've been mixing for years, and that price is locked in. You know what I mean? So it doesn't matter if they got a new artist or an established artist. I'm on file. That's the rate they pay, and they're happy to pay it. And I'd be crazy not to take it. For songwriters, I've been doing the same price, basically $200 a demo, forever. And that publishers can't afford to pay as much, obviously, and especially now since, Pandora, Spotify, Apple Music, stuff like that, the streaming business, a lot of the demos have been cut back, But then I've also got a rate for independents, whereas if they're going to put something out, say on the internet and sell it, I'll be like, okay, let's do it, $500, because they're going to make some money off it. So it's not just a one-time demo thing where it's going to be used to not make money, but actually it would be used to make money, but per se that $200 piece of intellectual property is not going to earn income after that. It would be recut, and the income will come off a different stream of that. So yeah, I have no problem charging different prices, and some people just can't pay. Some people are like, dude, we love what you do, but we don't have a $2,500 for you to mix like, Chris Young's record. I'm like, well, do you have backers, or do you have, do you want to put it on the internet, or is this just a song demo that you would like to just pitch? So that will dictate the price, Most people don't have a problem. I mean, just be open and honest with them and say, hey, obviously, this is usually what I get paid to do a record. We don't have a big conglomerate record company behind it. So yeah, I'll cut you a break. Absolutely. If you're paying for it out of your own pocket, I'm definitely not going to charge you $2,500 a song if you're paying for it out of your pocket.
Yeah. Well, tell us about, when you're doing negotiation like that on price, do you ask them to Dropbox you session files or stems, or what does that look like?
We'll go ahead, and 9 times out of 10, I just ask for the Pro Tools session. Since I'm in Pro Tools, I can open that up so they can send me the session. If they're in Logic or Ableton or some other DAW, just do consolidated WAV files back to 0. I always tell them to, if there's a certain effect they love on any of the instruments that they don't think I can reproduce or recreate, to print it, and then send me the dry as well. But usually I'm hoping they have their vocals tuned. If not, I can do it. I may charge a little extra or farm it out to a couple people I know that do that on a regular basis, But for the most part, I just say, just send me your audio, We'll take care of it. So, but a lot of times I get stuff that's screwed up or missing files, and then I'll have to go back and call them and say, hey, I'm not really a stickler, just because I'm pretty laid back, so I don't have like a list of rules. I've seen on some dudes' websites, they're like, okay, if you would like me to mix, this is the protocol. And that's pretty cool, so they probably avoid having to call them and say, hey, you're missing the kick track. We need to do a save copy in and click all audio files. It's spread across 3 drives back at your place in, Idaho or whatever. But yeah, I don't mind. 9 times out of 10, if something is screwed up, it gives me an excuse to call them and chat with them and talk to them about their project and work on those people skills. So there you go. Creates twofold.
Does your wife have any part in your business as far as helping you keep things running smoothly, doing any financials, doing anything on the business side of things?
She does. Actually, I used to do all my own billing, and my wife, she's always been a stay-at-home mom. And once the kids started going to school, she had, the day free. And she was like, I asked her if she would like to do the books and the billing because she's way better with money than me. So, to this day, my wife is I'll make the money, give it to my wife. I mean, she could be stockpiling it in Sweden for all I know. I couldn't even remember how to write a check the other day. I had to call and ask her. But I actually asked her if she wanted to do the books, and she said yes. So she, got Quicken out and got her little system going. But it works really good because we can do a good cop, bad cop thing. So like back when I used to do the billing, I would have to be the guy in the studio. Yeah, man, love your song, blah, blah, blah. And then I'd also have to be the guy that followed up 2 days later. Hey, dude, it's been 2 months and I don't have any money. So I was wearing double hats. But when you've got good cop, bad cop, I'm almost removed from that. And so I don't have to be the bad guy. And she can be like, listen, motherfucker, pay your bill or I'm going to slice your throat, slash your tires, and bomb your house. Then if she needs to get me involved, the hammer's really getting thrown. So, but it really has worked good, So I basically come to work and just fill out almost like invoices she's printed out for me with the song title, the client, the email, where to send it, the date, the services performed. And I literally have paper. I'm an old school pen and paper guy, and a little folder. So I'll take those home, give them to her. She'll transfer them into the computer, keep the paper records just in case we've ever need to cross-check it, She just boxes them up in a folder or a bin or something, But it works really good, Go a little old school, new school, and then good cop, bad cop. But it works good. She sends out monthly reminders, and she stays on it pretty good, I would let them build up because I just dreaded doing it. I'd have to sit down and email them. I just hated doing it. So I would wait till sometimes I'd get 2 months behind. And, when you're self-employed, what we do today, we'll probably see a check in 2 months. So if you wait 2 months, you're going to have a 2-month period where your mailbox is going to be empty. So I usually try to give them to her at least once a week, if not a couple times a week. I'll just feed her the invoices as I get them. And then you always have a steady, constant stream coming in the mailbox. So, but yeah, it works good.
You have a rejection letter on your wall.
I do.
Can you tell us about that?
Back in 92, I think, 92 or 94, I sent out job applications after I'd finished up recording school at Full Sail, done my internship. Then I came back and worked at a music store and was running live sound and selling guitars in Lincoln, Nebraska at a music store. I sent out resumes, and I sent one down to Nashville, one to Virginia Beach, one to on the border of Mexico doing Latino music, and then one up kind of by Chicago. And the only one that I heard back from, believe it or not, right away was the one from Nashville. And I basically got lambasted because the gentleman I sent it to thought I was being too forward, thought I was too aggressive in my language or whatever, I looked at it like I was just excited, fresh out of school, and I was willing to do anything. And he seemed to think that I came off a little too cocky or arrogant, whatever. But it was pretty funny because I kept it, framed it, and I've had it since 94, and it almost serves as my motivation. It was like my first rejection letter, and he was pretty harsh about it. I mean, he basically told me that I was basically an idiot, and that I should just steer clear,
What is he doing now?
I have no idea. Everybody asks me that when they come in and they see it. I think I even posted it on Facebook, but I've never met him to date. And boy, I'd kind of like to. It'd kind of be nice to actually thank him, for being kind of a jerk to me.
Yeah, put the chip on your shoulder.
Yeah, it motivated me. And to this day, I see it when I come in and I'm like, you know what? It kind of keeps you going. When somebody tells you can't do something, especially me, it's just like, okay, that's a challenge. I can do it and I will do it.
And you did it.
Yeah, and I did it. So, and I hope to keep doing it.
All right, so now it's time to start wrapping the interview up, and we have a segment at the end that we call the Fave 5. This is 5 questions that we ask all of our guests, and since Billy Decker is our first guest on this podcast, we're still working on what those questions are going to be. So these are the 5 questions we have right now. They may change in the future, but this is what we have at this moment. So the first question is, if you could give young Billy Decker advice when you were just starting out, knowing what you know now, what would you tell yourself?
Ask more questions. Back when I was younger, I realized you could get a lot of answers if you just took the initiative and stepped outside and made yourself a little uncomfortable and took a chance. When I was younger, I didn't do that. I kind of just sat back and waited for the answers. And when I realized they weren't going to come to me and I had to go find them, and I probably hit that in like my mid-30s. I realized that, after I had kids and stuff like that. And I'm like, after I had enough self-confidence and had done enough projects to go, hey, maybe, we all think we suck. I do. To this day, I hear something. I'll hear something you mix, Brian, and I'll go, oh, man, back to the drawing board. I'm terrible. I don't even know why I'm doing this,
I feel the same way.
Then there's other people that come along and go, hey, dude, they feel that way about themselves, and maybe they're talking about me. Like I was the one that did something that they liked, or something like that. So once you realize that you don't suck and start asking a lot of questions, stay humble. But that's the best thing I would have said to myself is to gone after it a little bit harder and maybe not sit around and wait for it, to drop in my lap, but to go after it.
What's the most eye-opening / helpful business mistake you've made in your career so far?
The eye-opening business mistake I made was not backing up a hard drive and erasing a major label project.
Ooh.
$70,000 down the drain. And we had to re-record it. Now, luckily, I did not have to pay for it, but I have never lost another audio file in the 15 years since then.
You never make that mistake more than one time, and both Billy and I have learned that one the hard way, although I would say yours, Billy, was a little harder lesson learned than mine.
Yeah, I was actually not hired on the project, so that's why I think I wasn't responsible for it, because I was almost just like an intern type thing, So it was like, well, we can't ask him for the money because he doesn't have anything, So that's probably the only thing that saved me is I was unemployed at the time.
All right, question 3 of the Fave 5. Was there any sort of business book or some sort of article or anything that maybe sparked something in you that changed your life or changed your trajectory in some way? And if not any sort of article or business book, maybe some sort of specific relationship, one of those 3 things.
Yeah, there wasn't a book, but there was a producer named Scott Hendricks, and he actually is head of A&R over at Warner Brothers now and used to run Capitol Records, produced everybody in country music at one time or another, John Michael Montgomery, Brooks and Dunn, you name it, But he told me, and to this day, he still follows this policy, but he said, call everybody back by the end of the day. So like say, we've been doing this podcast, my phone's rang like 2 or 3 times, and it's on silent, but he said, never let a phone call go unanswered longer than, basically 24 hours. And to this day, I can like call him right now, and 9 times out of 10, he'll pick up the phone and say, hey, dude, I'm in a meeting. Let me call you back later. That's how good he is. You know what I mean? And he is like sitting on the top of the music business industry. But he'll pick up the phone call from an unknown number, because I used to call and before we had caller ID and stuff, and he would, Hendricks, this is Scott, So that just always stuck with me and impressed me that no matter who you are, no matter how big you think you are, answer your phone call and return all your messages by day's end, and you'll probably do okay. I'll take that one step further and followed that advice and got a gig because this other producer wasn't calling them back. And so they pulled the plug. I ended up getting the whole mix gig because they couldn't get a phone call back from a producer that they'd started working with. So yeah, so there you go. It actually worked. Real-time experience.
Next question. What's the biggest challenge in your business right now, and how are you dealing with it?
You know what? The biggest challenge right now, I would say, has been the adjustment from the work that I was used to getting for so long, meaning from the publishers, and now it's gone more independent just because publishers have cut back on all their demo budgets. I still get demos, from songwriters. I've got some today, as a matter of fact, on my list. But they used to come every day, 5, 6, 7 songs every day on the dot. You know what I mean? Every day, everybody was doing that. And now those have gotten sparse, but the independent world has picked up and taken its place. So probably the biggest change has been more independent work. So songwriters used to hand me a batch of 5 songs, you know what I mean? And I would get $200 a song. That's $1,000 right there. You know what I mean? Bang those out in a day, make $1,000 a day. Great. Now I'll get maybe 2 songs at $500 a day. You know what I mean? Rather than, so the amount, the volume has gone down, but the price has stayed the same, if not gone up. You know what I mean? And the price has just gone up because my price has gone up a bit because I've gotten more number ones and stuff like that. And people are willing to pay more, when they call me. I would say the volume has gone down, but the price has stayed the same, if not actually gone up. And that's good and bad because I love being busy. You know what I mean? It still feels weird if I come in, I'll make the same amount of money, but it feels weird if I don't do 5 songs in a day. I feel like I'm slacking. You know what I mean? Or I'm slipping. So, or I'll even make more money and only mix a couple songs, but it's like, man, I should be doing like 6 or 7.
All right, this leads well into the 5th question in the Fave 5, and that is, what keeps your passion going in your business, especially when times get tough? And I know that you recently went through, you were battling cancer, you just cleared all that up, which is awesome to hear. So what keeps you going when all of that stuff is happening in your life, when you got so many distractions and where things get tough?
You want to know something interesting? Not that anybody wants cancer, but I think getting it actually slowed me down. It didn't slow me down work-wise, but it slowed me down stress-wise, because when somebody tells you you're going to die, all of a sudden you go, maybe I better reevaluate what's important to me. And you stop worrying about all the little things. You stop worrying about the phone ringing. Like we were talking earlier, it's hard to do, but you just go, you know what? I'm just going to chill and just kind of sit back and let life's little plan take place. And the phone rings more. You get more work than you can even imagine. You're happier. I think just slowing down was probably the best thing to ever happen to me. And like I say, slowing down work-wise isn't what happened. I've actually gotten more work, but it's just slowing down in your head. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And you stop sweating the small stuff. And I apply that to audio too. So like when I'm mixing or at the studio, the thing that really excites me now coming in is to like put on something Brian did or one of the Churkos or Chris Ordalgie and listen to it and go, oh man, that is, I want to do that. And it's almost like I've got this renewed energy. You know what I mean? And it's because I've been able to like just take a deep breath. I beat cancer. I battled it, and it's almost, I wish. They say the chemo is supposed to give you like superhuman powers and everything changes. And I was either hoping for X-ray vision or like super hearing, and I got neither. But I'd like to think, I pretend I got super hearing.
That's awesome.
So where can people go to find out more about you, Billy, to find out what you got going on, to find out what's new in your life and what kind of work you've done and stuff?
Well, you can always hit me up on Facebook at just Billy Decker. A lot of people, they have unlisted numbers and they hide their emails. And I'm like, no, I live off that. I want everybody to have my cell phone. I want everybody to have my email. So you could always send me an email at decorator, DECKERATOR at Comcast.net, or you can go to billydecker.com. I finally got a website this last year, and that shows pictures of like the studio I work at and some of the stuff I've done. Yeah, I seriously urge everybody, just like I said, I reached out to Bob Clearmountain. Hey, it takes nothing to email me. Man, seriously, if you have a question, hit me up. I'll probably learn something from you that you probably wouldn't even be expecting to divulge. I'll come away the one that's the winner. So And who knows, you might be the next producer that's going to call me 5 years from now. So I'm going to be nice to you because I'd like to work for you.
That's cool.
We both thank you so much for coming on the podcast today, taking your time out of your day to do this. And we are both super excited that you beat cancer and there's going to be a lot more Billy Decker in the world.
Mm-hmm.
Well, thank you, fellas. It was a pleasure, and I'd like to say the honor was mine. I mean that.
So that is it for our interview with Billy Decker. Chris, what were some of your takeaways from this episode?
Well, it's a few weeks now after we recorded it. And, I've had a lot of time to digest, and I just keep on thinking about what Billy said about social skills and about how important those were to him as he built his business. And I just can't stop thinking about that, about how they're like a meta skill, and how when I began my career, that I only invested in audio skills, not in social skills, and suffered mightily when I first started out, 15 years ago or so.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I struggled with that same stuff early in my career. I'd actually say for the majority of my career, I struggled with being as easygoing and laid back as Billy seems to be. In all my interactions with him, he's acted exactly how he acted in that interview, just super laid back, easy to talk to. And that's actually one of the things I took away from this episode was his overall mindset, his overall attitude. He has, I don't want to go too deep into the mindset side of things, but if anyone else in the world has ever had an abundance mindset, it's Billy Decker. They have the abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset. A scarcity mindset mixing engineer would be somebody who wants to hoard all their samples. They want to hoard all their knowledge. They don't want to share it. They don't want anybody to know it. And they don't want to help anybody because that's more competition for them. An abundance mindset, someone like Billy Decker, a mixing engineer like Billy Decker, is going to share all his knowledge with everyone. And that's exactly how Billy is. He shares everything. He'll give you exact settings on anything you've ever heard him do if you ask for him. And that's because he is all about the abundance mindset, which is, if I help others, they will help me. There's more than enough to go around for me. That is that sort of mindset. And he has a great attitude towards helping other people, I think.
Yeah, we've talked about it before on the podcast, but there's a book called The Go-Giver that's huge for a lot of entrepreneurs. Small business owners. It's really short. What is it, like 90 pages or 120 pages or something?
Just a little parable.
Yeah, just a little parable. And I'm just sort of clicking with this right now. Billy Decker is living out the Go-Giver probably better than anybody else I know.
That's so true.
And I doubt he's read it.
Yeah, Billy Decker is the Go-Giver, and he's never read the book. Most likely. He may have. I'm not going to say he hasn't, but I would guess that he has not. Because it's not, it's a pretty well-known book, but I wouldn't say it's a super popular, it's not a massive success of a book, is it?
I don't think that it is, but Billy just strikes me as that's just him, man, that he was born that way.
Yep.
And I like him. He's great.
Same here. He's just nice. He's nice as fuck. That's the only way of putting it. Another takeaway I had was he is not afraid of failure by any means. He's okay with putting himself out on the line, cold calling people. When he's talking about cold calling people all along his career, that's terrifying for most people to think about. Cold calling somebody that has no idea who you are, and to put yourself out there to be rejected like that. People are terrified of rejection, and Billy Decker seems to have some sort of weird immunity to potential rejection in his life.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. He does have this, and you get that with him, that he has this immunity to, I don't know if I'd go as far as saying self-doubt, because that usually implies that you're cocky and irritating and annoying. Billy is none of those things.
Nope.
And it's interesting. He's a refreshing combination of incredible confidence and incredible humility.
And that being said, like his self-promotion, he's okay with promoting himself. I know so many people that are terrified of promoting themselves, because they're scared of the rejection, because they're basically putting their soul out into the world and they don't want to be looked at as either cocky or looked at as a failure or looked at as, they don't want that feedback potentially. They don't want people to know what they're doing, so they're scared to promote themselves.
Well, I think you're onto something there. This idea that to be afraid of self-promotion is not humility. And that's something that I probably need to learn better in my life, that putting yourself out there or being afraid to put yourself out there is not humility.
That's true.
You're afraid of what people will think of you, which is not humility. It's completely the opposite. And yeah, I really took a lot home from that. And it reminded me when we did that first interview, when we first talked about doing this podcast, one of the biggest things we talked about was let's do lots of interviews. And, we haven't done a whole lot. Hopefully this is the beginning of a lot of them.
I mean, this is the first one we've done so far, but yeah, we'll be doing more.
Yeah. But, the big thing for me is I thought about, wow, this is a lot better than college. The chance to sit down with someone like Billy and ask questions for my own personal benefit, but also for the benefit of our podcast. And I'm so excited to be able to do that, to basically, I was listening to a Donald Miller podcast the other day, and he made a joke about he records a podcast to get free consulting.
Yeah.
I was like, man, I need some more free consulting.
We need more guests because we learn a lot from people like Billy Decker. One final thing I had actually written down as far as takeaways that I got from this episode is he is a master of staying top of mind. And I think that is one of his biggest contributors of success in his niche of country music, which is one of the most competitive markets in Nashville, Tennessee, where country music rules the city, basically. To become such a dominant force in the mixing world in this really competitive genre, you take something special, not just in the skills and ability, but the ability to stay top of mind consistently over a long period of time.
Not get lost in the noise.
Yeah, not get lost in the noise. So his ability to genuinely want to keep in touch with people, to genuinely want to maintain those friendships, but also I think his cutting boards are genius.
Yeah. Well, what's refreshing about Billy is that I've met a lot of people who have been, aspiring entrepreneurs or businessmen and women. And the thing that you run into sometimes is they get so focused on the businessy thing and being professional and, having this sort of like really irritating professional, like business ease in their emails. And what's so refreshing about Billy is he just flies in the face of all that. He stands out. And as a result, he's clearly really, really good at business and has grown a really, really cool business. And it's encouraging when you see people that are the opposite of an MBA, a master's in business, that are killing it. I love that. That's super cool. Hats off to Billy Decker.
Yeah, I want to just say again, thanks to Billy Decker for taking his time on this interview with us. We were inspired by Billy Decker's interview. And so on the next episode, which comes out next Tuesday, we are going to try our best to tackle the topic of social skills when it relates to your home studio. So stay tuned for that episode, and that'll be out next Tuesday, just first thing in the morning. Pop on, listen to that. And until next time, happy hustling.
Whoa.